Hello, class. It's me, Mr. Harris. I'm back looking at the effects of World War One. So we're going to briefly hit on a few major topics and areas of concern and dispute after World War One. All right, so pay close attention and listen up. All right, so when we look at effects of war, we can kind of use our common sense to kind of figure out that it's going to impact all the nations that were involved. All right, and so there, in this particular war, it was definitely wide ranging. All right, and what we see here, we see entire populations being affected. All right, it wasn't just the armies or navy or the military personnel, entire population. All right, and this is also looked upon as the first major conflict between modern and industrialized nations. All right. So we know that one of the things that we see during the war that women was the fact that women took the place of men in the factories and other jobs previously carried out by men. And of course, we've talked about the new forms of weapons and warfare that were introduced. So let's just give you a little overview. All right. Now, Central Powers and in Russia, the civilian population suffered severe hardships that were caused by those blockades. Remember, supplies and food could not reach the civilians, actually, not just the military personnel. And all European states involved in the war, the government organized ordinary people. Basically, everyone mobilized for war. We had the propaganda posters that we looked at the end of the war to mobilize people at home on the home front to sort of support this war cause. All right. And what we're going to see are the empires that dominated Central and Eastern Europe. All right. The major empires that they're still lingering around, they're going to sort of disappear after this war. All right. Now, of course, we know that there was a high death toll. Germans, almost 2 million. And as you can see, the list sort of lists them in descending order. All right. Now, this chart right here you see breaks down the different countries involved in World War One. All right, the number of people that were killed, wounded, the total, and the percentage of the population. So we can see here that Austria-Hungary, a large percentage of their population died. All right, while they might not have had as many casualties, just the percentage of their total population. Okay, but so take note of this. It's very alarming. These are very alarming statistics. All right. Effects of war, all right, when we're looking at a sizable proportion of the entire generation of young men perished, all right, and this is commonly referred to as the lost generation. And you see an example there with France that lost about 20% of men of military age, and Germany, all right, there were lots of different issues going on within Germany, economic and political issues, and it's sort of going to cause a revolution after Germany sort of defeated in this war, and then the Kaiser or the Chancellor, remember the Kaiser, Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate, and it's sort of going to set up this republic, all right, and over the next few years, the Weimar Republic, which became known as, are sort of going to take charge in Germany, and they're going to experience several and severe economic crises, political crises, and social problems. All right. Now, of course, when Hitler becomes chancellor in 1933, it's going to end this Weimar Republic. The Habsburg Empire, we're talking about Austria and Hungary. All right. Their last emperor, or Karl I, was forced to abdicate. And remember the different nationalities that made up Austria-Hungary. All right, they're sort of going to declare themselves independent, and Austria-Hungary is actually going to split into two separate states. All right, and we know that in Russia, the pressure for war caused two revolutions in 1917. You had the first where they overthrew the Tsar, Nicholas II, and then later the second revolution from October to November brought Lenin and the Bolsheviks to power. All right, now Italy, their resources were drained. All right, and of course, Italy was heavily in debt. All right, and so as a result, when we have these economic problems going on within the country, it's going to cause the government to be looked upon as in an unfavorable light. All right, and so this caused one of Europe's first fascist dictators to rise, Benito Mussolini. Now, the United States, China, and Japan, they actually took this time to expand their trade. For example, Americans enjoyed this economic boom in the 1920s. All right, lots of trading partners developed, and we see that China and Japan also are going to benefit from this increased trade. All right, because these countries did not necessarily have a huge, significant, or excuse me, a significant amount of people involved or die in the war. So the countries are so, and we didn't see a lot of fighting in these countries, so, or any fighting. So that's sort of going to cause them to prosper. All right. Now, of course, many politicians and leaders were determined that the horrors of the First World War would never be repeated. And Woodrow Wilson is going to come up with a plan known as the League of Nations. All right, and we're going to look at that when we start talking about the interwar period, which was supposedly set up, for one, to help settle future disputes, quote unquote, through arbitration and through collective security. All right. Now, the problems. All right. When the war started, none of the participants had any idea about what they sort of wanted to achieve. As you see here, they didn't necessarily have any war aims. All right. Now, Germany and Austria, of course, they wanted to preserve the Habsburg Empire, and they thought that Serbia, of course, as we've seen, was a big threat, and they wanted to sort of end the Serb problem. But the war progressed, and I guess when we look at this, we have to look at it through the lens that you have to give people a motivation to continue to fight, because this was a long war from 1914 to 1918. And so many countries started to develop objectives to fight and list their war aims. So let's look at these real quick. All right. In Britain, the British Prime Minister, who was Lloyd George, war aims that were sort of developed, basically wanted to defend democracy. All right, and wanted to restore the Alsace-Lorraine to France. All right, remember they lost that after the Franco-Prussian War. And wanted to restore Belgium to Serbia, independent Poland. And here's the key issue here. When we talk about fighting for democracy, democratic self-government for the nationalities of Austria-Hungary. So there were their war aims, to preserve democracy and for the different nationalities and ethnic groups that sought their own sort of land or sort of country, their own self-government through democracy. All right, and then of course self-determination for all the German colonies and an international organization to prevent war. All right. So Woodrow Wilson is going to outline his war aims in his famous 14 points. All right, in January 1918, and you see here the listing of the 14 points. We're going to do a sort of activity to sort of bring this home when you come to class on Friday, all right, before we do our presentation. So please, please, please keep that in mind, all right? And there you see this. Also, these war aims, all right, more of the 14 points. And these points achieved publicity when the Germans claimed that they had been cheated because they expected the peace terms to sort of be based on them, all right? But yet and still you see the peace terms based on all the victors, so to speak, all right? Now, of course, among the victors or the victorious powers, we have many differing points of view. All right, France, who was represented by Clemenceau, they wanted a harsh peace settlement. All right, they wanted to basically put Germany to the point where they were economically and militarily unsound. All right, so they could never invade the French frontiers again. Britain, on the other hand, they were in favor of a less severe settlement. All right, they wanted Germany to recover quickly so they could resume their economic ties and distributing British goods. All right. However, the British public did expect a harsh peace settlement, based off the number of casualties and the length of this war. So the British public was actually going against what the Prime Minister sort of represented or wanted. And he actually ran on a slogan about death to the Kaiser. All right. Now the U.S. was in favor of the lenient peace treaty. All right. Now they did have the view that there should be some sort of reparations for the losses to civilians and property. They didn't necessarily USA didn't necessarily have the opinion that Germany should take on the whole cost of the war. All right, and Wilson was also in favor, as you see here, of self-determination. All right, nations should be freed from foreign rule and given democratic governments of their own choice. So the Treaty of Versailles, June 1919, the conference came up with the Treaty of Versailles for Germany. And then there were other treaties that we're going to look at in a separate presentation that dealt with the other countries or central powers for the war. All right. Now this Treaty of Versailles was very controversial. All right. One of the criticisms of this was the fact that it was too hard on the Germans, and of course the Germans did object, and this did provoke another war. And the amount of reparations that Germany had to pay, and to completely disarm, with the exception of like 100,000 troops, proved to be impossible to carry out. All right. Of course, Germany had to lose its territory in Europe, and the African colonies were taken away, and they became mandates under the League of Nations supervision. All right, and that just simply means that various members or various nations within the League would overlook those German colonies. So basically, they just stripped Germany of its colonies. All right, and as you see here, the German armaments were strictly limited to a maximum of 100,000 troops, and no conscription, which just simply means being forced or required that you sort of serve in the military. And the Rhineland was to be permanently demilitarized. All right. All right. So the war guilt clause, it fixed the blame for the outbreak of the war. For the outbreak of the war was solely on Germany and her allies. All right. Now Germany was forced to pay reparations, but the amount wasn't actually decided to later. But it amounted up to about $600 million. All right, and this was a huge, huge debt that Germany sort of had to pay, and it's sort of going to cause plenty of problems throughout the interwar period. All right, then there was the League of Nations, which was formed. All right, its aims and organization were set out in the League Covenant. So why did Germany object? All right. One reason was it was a dictated peace. All right, Germans were not allowed to really have a say at all. They weren't even allowed in the talks leading up to this treaty about its future. All right, and so Hitler's going to make this argument later when he comes to power, diktat. All right, which simply means that it was sort of dictated to him, and as a result, it should not be morally binding. So there's no moral obligation to follow the terms of this treaty. All right, and many of the provisions they felt were not based on the concept of 14 points, the whole self-determination. Remember, all of Germany's colonial possessions were under League mandates, quote unquote. The loss of, course, territory in Europe, the African colonies, and the disarmament clause were deeply resented. Many Germans felt that a military of only 100,000 men or standing army was not enough to sort of protect the people and to defend any issues within the country militarily. All right. And of course, the war guilt clause was placed all the blame on Germany, and the reparation, $600 million, was impossible to pay. So here you see the map comparison between Europe in 1914 and then Europe in 1925. All right, so about 11 years later, this is pre-outbreak of World War I. All right, and now we see the aftermath and the different states that are sort of going to develop as a result. Yugoslavia, Hungary, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, all right, and the different states that broke off from Russia, all right, which then became the Soviet Union. So we're going to look at sort of how this map ended up this way when we look at the other treaties that ended the war, okay? Because what you don't notice is Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary sort of broke up, and then Serbia. So do you notice any other differences in this map? So take note of that. Or these two maps, excuse me. So winners and losers, what do we really have here? All right, some countries had the support of the victorious powers. All right, and they did gain their dream of independence. So we have a new Poland, a new Czech state, the new state of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland. All right, they were all free from Russian control. The victors decided that the lands taken from Russia by Germany were available to redistribute. Interesting. All right, so the Southern Slav, they got a federation dominated by Serbia. So all the Slavs are united in Yugoslavia. All right. And then we also see economic and social change. Trading networks of pre-war 1914 world were dislocated by the blockades and the economic disruption. And so we also see severe inflation by European governments. There was also a shortage of labor. We've talked about more women entering the workforce as a result of their increased roles during the war, and as a result, women are going to achieve a higher social equality. All right, and there you have it, my friends. The effects of World War I. I'm going to come back to you and talk about some of the other peace treaties. All right.